The church had spent years wondering whether Noah Bennett truly belonged among them. In just a few hours, they would be begging him to speak. Homecoming Sunday had finally arrived. More than 400 people filled Grace Fellowship Church with laughter, hugs, music, and celebration. It looked like the happiest morning of the year. No one noticed the quiet 12-year-old standing near the entrance, studying something everyone else walked past without a second glance. Not the pastor, not the elders, not the volunteers, not even his own mother. To everyone else, it was just another beautiful Sunday. To Noah, something wasn't right. And before the first hymn was finished, one tiny detail that no one else could see would change every life inside that church forever. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the rolling hills outside the small Tennessee town as Grace Fellowship Church slowly came to life. Morning dew still clung to the grass when the first volunteer pulled into the parking lot. The familiar squeak of the front doors echoed through the quiet sanctuary as they were unlocked. Inside, everything smelled of fresh wood polish and freshly cut flowers. The sanctuary looked beautiful. White lilies framed the pulpit. Blue hydrangeas rested beside the communion table. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, painting ribbons of color across the polished wooden floor. Every hymnal sat neatly inside its rack. Every bulletin had been carefully arranged. Every chair in the choir loft stood perfectly straight. Months of preparation had finally become reality. By 7 o'clock, volunteers filled every corner of the building. The kitchen buzzed with cheerful conversation as coffee brewed, biscuits baked, and casseroles warmed in the ovens. The aroma of fried chicken, homemade peach cobbler, buttered rolls, and fresh coffee drifted through the fellowship hall. Laughter echoed from room to room. Someone tested the microphones. Another volunteer adjusted the projection screen. Children's ministry workers carried boxes of crayons, coloring books, and name tags into their classrooms. Outside, more vehicles began filling the parking lot. Some families had driven for nearly 3 hours to attend Homecoming Sunday. Grandparents embraced grandchildren they hadn't seen since Christmas. Former members pointed toward the sanctuary and smiled as memories came flooding back. This place hasn't changed a bit. Feels just like home. Pastor Michael stood near the front entrance, greeting every person with the same warm smile. "Welcome home. We're so glad you're here. Happy homecoming." His voice carried genuine joy. This was the day he looked forward to every year. Across town, Sarah finished buttoning the sleeves of her navy blue dress before quietly walking into Noah's bedroom. He was already awake. His bed was neatly made. His shoes were lined up perfectly beneath the chair. His white dress shirt hung evenly beneath his navy sweater, exactly as he had arranged it the night before. The small Bible David had given him rested carefully beside the bed. Sarah smiled. "Been ready for a while, haven't you?" Noah nodded. "I didn't want to be late." Sarah laughed softly. "I don't think we've ever been late," he smiled back. That little smile eased something inside her heart. The conversation she had overheard at church still lingered in her thoughts, but looking at Noah now reminded her why she had chosen faith instead of fear. A few minutes later, they pulled into the church parking lot. Cars already filled nearly every row. Volunteers waved traffic into open spaces. Families carrying covered dishes walked toward the fellowship hall. Children hurried ahead of their parents, laughing as they raced toward friends they hadn't seen in months. Everything looked exactly as Noah remembered. Almost. As Sarah gathered her purse and locked the car, Noah remained standing beside the passenger door. His eyes slowly moved across the church grounds, from the flower beds to the front entrance to the sanctuary windows, then toward the side of the building where the fellowship hall connected to the main sanctuary. He stood completely still. Sarah noticed. "What is it?" she asked. Noah didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the same place. Finally, he spoke. "Something's different." Sarah followed his gaze. She looked at the flowers, the sidewalk, the brick walls, the church sign. Everything appeared perfectly normal. "I don't see anything," she said gently. Noah continued looking. Neither did anyone else. But for reasons he couldn't yet explain, something about Grace Fellowship Church no longer felt exactly the way it always had. For a few long seconds, Noah didn't move. Cars continued pulling into the parking lot. Families greeted one another with warm embraces. Children hurried toward the fellowship hall, laughing as they carried trays of cookies and covered dishes. The celebration had already begun, but Noah remained completely still. His eyes stayed fixed on the same area beside the sanctuary. Sarah gently touched his shoulder. "Come on," she said with a reassuring smile. "Everyone's waiting." Noah looked at her. Then he looked back toward the building. Finally, he nodded. Together, they started walking toward the front entrance. As they passed through the crowd, familiar faces greeted them from every direction. "Good morning, Sarah. Happy homecoming." "Morning, Noah." Grace Carter stepped forward with her usual warm smile. "There you are," she said. "I was beginning to wonder if my favorite seat would stay empty today." She gently pointed toward the second pew. "I saved it for you." Noah offered his small, familiar smile. Grace noticed him glancing back toward the side of the building. "What are you looking at?" Noah hesitated. "I don't know," she smiled kindly. "Well, when you figure it out, you'll have to tell me." He nodded politely. But he wasn't smiling anymore. Inside the sanctuary, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows exactly as it had every Sunday for years. Everything looked familiar. Everything sounded familiar. The choir softly rehearsed one final hymn. Volunteers arranged bulletins along the front pews. Children whispered excitedly to one another before their classes began. It should have felt comforting. Instead, Noah's attention drifted back toward the same section of the building. Something continued pulling at his thoughts. Not a sound, not a smell, not a person. A detail, a tiny detail, one so ordinary that hundreds of people walked past it without noticing. Noah quietly turned away from the second pew, without telling anyone where he was going. He began walking toward the side hallway that connected the sanctuary to the fellowship hall. For the first time that morning, he decided to take a closer look. The hallway was quieter than the rest of the church. The joyful sounds from the fellowship hall faded into a soft murmur as Noah walked slowly along the polished floor. Sunlight spilled through the narrow windows, leaving bright rectangles across the hallway tiles. He stopped, looked ahead, then continued walking. Every few steps, his eyes moved from one familiar object to the next. The framed photographs hanging along the wall, the fire extinguisher beside the nursery door, the drinking fountain near the fellowship hall entrance, the bulletin board covered with announcements for Vacation Bible School, the ladies' prayer breakfast, and the annual food drive. Everything appeared exactly where it belonged, yet something inside him refused to settle. Behind him, Sarah was helping Grace Carter arrange a few extra bulletins near the sanctuary entrance. She glanced toward the hallway. "Where's Noah?" Grace smiled. "He probably wandered over to look at the stained glass windows again." Sarah nodded. He often did that. Whenever the church became crowded, Noah liked walking through the quieter parts of the building for a few minutes before returning to his seat. She wasn't worried. Not yet. Meanwhile, Noah continued toward the hallway that connected the sanctuary to the fellowship hall. Volunteers hurried past carrying trays of desserts. "Excuse me, sweetheart," coming through. He stepped politely to one side, waiting until they had passed. Then his eyes caught something. He frowned. Slowly, he walked closer. Mounted high on the wall was a large vent that supplied air to both the sanctuary and the fellowship hall. He stared at it for several seconds. His head tilted slightly. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, then he opened them again. It looked different, not broken, not damaged, just different. He couldn't explain why. He quietly counted the narrow metal slats with his eyes, just as he had done dozens of times before while waiting for church to begin. 1, 2, 3. Everything seemed ordinary. Still, the uneasy feeling remained. He took another step. Nearby, an elderly maintenance volunteer pushed a cart filled with cleaning supplies. "Morning, Noah," the man said cheerfully. Noah looked at him. "Good morning." Volunteer continued down the hallway without stopping. Noah turned back toward the vent. His fingers rubbed together slowly, the familiar rhythm helping him organize the thoughts racing through his mind. Across the building, Pastor Michael checked his watch. Only 15 minutes remained before the service would begin. The choir had finished rehearsing. Ushers moved into position near the sanctuary doors. The first pews were already filling. Everything was running exactly on schedule. Harold Whitmore smiled with quiet satisfaction. "This is going to be our best homecoming yet," he said. Pastor Michael smiled. "I believe you're right." Neither of them noticed the little boy standing alone in the hallway. Neither of them noticed the growing concern on his face. Back at the vent, Noah slowly lowered his hand. He looked toward the fellowship hall, then back toward the sanctuary. Finally, his eyes settled on something near the base of the wall. He blinked, once, twice. His breathing became just a little slower. There it was again. The same tiny detail, so small that almost anyone else would have walked right past it. Noah took one cautious step closer. He didn't know exactly what he was seeing. But deep inside, he knew one thing with complete certainty. It wasn't supposed to be there. Noah slowly knelt beside the wall. The polished tile floor felt cool beneath his hand as he leaned forward for a closer look. He didn't touch anything, he simply observed. His eyes traced every inch of the corner where the sanctuary hallway met the fellowship hall. He remembered this hallway. Every Sunday before service, he walked through it, every Christmas, every Easter, every homecoming. He knew what belonged there, and what didn't. A faint crease formed across his forehead. Behind him, cheerful voices echoed through the building. The choir laughed as someone missed the opening note of a hymn. Children ran past the nursery before a volunteer gently reminded them to slow down. The smell of fresh coffee drifted down the hallway. Everything around him felt normal, except this. He stood and looked again. Then he quietly walked to the opposite side of the hallway. He wanted to see it from another angle still. It didn't look right. He wasn't frightened. He was confused. The feeling reminded him of seeing a page in a book where one word had been printed upside down. Most people would never notice. Noah always did. At that moment, Grace Carter stepped into the hallway carrying a stack of visitor packets. "There you are," she said with a smile. "I was beginning to think you disappeared." Noah pointed toward the wall. "Has that always been there?" Grace followed his finger. She looked carefully. The painted brick, the decorative trim, the nearby utility door, the air vent, everything looked perfectly ordinary. "I think so," she answered gently. "It looks the same to me." Noah didn't argue. He simply nodded. Grace smiled. "Come on. Pastor Michael will be starting in just a few minutes. Be there." She walked away, thinking nothing more of the conversation. Noah stayed where he was. He looked one last time, then he quietly whispered to himself, "It wasn't like that before." Across the church, the sanctuary was almost full. Every pew now held families dressed in their Sunday best. The choir members took their places. Ushers closed the side doors. Late arrivals hurried down the center aisle, smiling apologetically as they searched for empty seats. Pastor Michael stood behind the pulpit and glanced across the congregation. His heart swelled with gratitude. Homecoming Sunday had finally arrived. He offered a silent prayer. "Lord, let everything we do today bring glory to you." In the hallway, Noah finally turned away and walked back toward the sanctuary. But every few steps, he glanced over his shoulder. Something deep inside him refused to let the thought go. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't prove it. He only knew that the church he loved so much no longer looked exactly the way it had looked the Sunday before. And before the morning was over, someone would finally understand why. The opening hymn began exactly at 9 o'clock. The first notes of "Great is thy faithfulness" filled the sanctuary as more than 400 voices rose together in worship. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, bathing the room in warm shades of blue, red, and gold. Pastor Michael stood quietly near the front row, listening as the congregation sang with joyful hearts. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Sarah glanced toward Noah. He stood beside her with his little Bible held against his chest. He wasn't singing. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes Noah listened more than he participated. He loved hearing the harmony of the congregation. His eyes slowly drifted away from the hymn books. They moved across the sanctuary, the ceiling beams, the chandeliers, the windows, the choir loft. Then they settled once again on the side hallway he had just left. The uneasy feeling returned immediately. They moved across the sanctuary, the ceiling beams, the chandeliers, the windows, the choir loft. Then they settled once again on the side hallway he had just left. The uneasy feeling returned immediately. He looked at his mother. "Mom," Sarah leaned closer so she could hear him over the music. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I think something's wrong." She followed his gaze toward the side of the building. All she saw were smiling volunteers welcoming late arrivals. "What do you mean?" Noah hesitated. "I don't know." She gently squeezed his shoulder. "It's okay. You can tell me." He searched for words that refused to come. "It doesn't look right." Sarah looked again. Nothing seemed unusual. The flowers were exactly where they should be. The ushers stood at their posts. Children quietly settled beside their parents. She smiled reassuringly. "Maybe everything just feels different because there are so many people today." Noah wanted to believe her. He truly did, but the feeling wouldn't leave. As the hymn ended, the congregation took their seats. Pastor Michael stepped behind the pulpit. "Good morning, church." A joyful chorus answered him. "Good morning. Welcome to our annual Homecoming Sunday. Whether you've worshipped here for 50 years or this is your very first visit, we're grateful you're here." Warm applause echoed through the sanctuary. Pastor Michael smiled. "Today is about remembering God's faithfulness through every generation." As he spoke, Noah wasn't looking at the pulpit. He was looking toward the side entrance again. Near the hallway, one of the maintenance volunteers pushed a small cart loaded with supplies. He stopped briefly beside the utility room before continuing into the fellowship hall. Noah's eyes widened. The volunteer had unknowingly blocked his view for only a few seconds. When the cart moved away, Noah noticed it again. The same small detail, exactly where it had been before. He felt his heartbeat quicken. This time he was certain it hadn't changed. It had been there all morning. He leaned closer to his mother. "I have to tell Pastor Michael." Sarah looked at him with gentle surprise. "Right now?" Noah nodded. "Please." Sarah glanced toward the pulpit. Pastor Michael had just begun reading the morning scripture. Interrupting the service was something Noah had never done. She spoke softly. "Wait until after the reading." Noah didn't answer. His fingers began rubbing together in their familiar, gentle rhythm, not because the room was too loud, not because he was frightened, because every instinct inside him was telling him that waiting might be a mistake. For the first time that morning, Sarah noticed the concern in her son's eyes wasn't fading, it was growing. Sarah looked at her son again. She had learned over the years that Noah rarely spoke unless he believed something truly mattered. He wasn't a child who invented stories. He wasn't prone to panic. If he said something felt different, it usually meant he had noticed something everyone else had missed. Still, this was Homecoming Sunday. The sanctuary was full. Pastor Michael had only just begun welcoming the congregation. Sarah gently leaned closer. "Give me just a few minutes," she whispered. "When the choir finishes the special music, we'll go talk to Pastor Michael together." Noah looked toward the side hallway once more. "Okay." His answer was quiet, but it wasn't confident. Pastor Michael opened his Bible. Reading this morning comes from Psalm 100. Hundreds of pages rustled at once as the congregation turned to the passage. The sanctuary settled into peaceful silence. Outside, another family hurried across the parking lot, trying not to arrive too late. Inside the fellowship hall, volunteers made final preparations for the meal that would follow the service. Everything appeared calm. Everything appeared ordinary. Noah couldn't concentrate on the scripture reading. His eyes kept returning to the same place. Then another detail caught his attention. Someone opened the utility room door for just a moment before disappearing inside. The door closed again. Noah stared. He had walked past that room nearly every Sunday since he was 6 years old. He knew exactly what usually happened there: maintenance supplies, cleaning equipment, extra light bulbs, nothing more. Yet this morning, something about the room didn't match the picture stored in his memory. He stood. Sarah immediately looked at him. "Where are you going?" "I need to look." She gently touched his arm. "Right now, sweetheart." Several people sitting nearby turned their heads for only a moment before looking back toward the pulpit. Harold Whitmore, seated 3 pews behind them, noticed Noah standing. He quietly sighed, not out of anger, out of concern that the service might be interrupted. Sarah softly encouraged Noah to sit back down. After a brief pause, he obeyed. But his eyes never left the hallway. Pastor Michael continued reading. "Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise." The words echoed through the sanctuary. Noah heard every syllable. Yet another sound reached him, a faint metallic noise. so soft that it blended into the building's ordinary creaks. Click. He looked up instantly. No one else reacted. An elderly couple continued reading their Bibles. The choir members sat quietly. The ushers remained at the back doors. Sarah hadn't heard it. Noah waited. Several seconds passed, then, click, it came again. Almost hidden beneath the gentle hum of the church's air conditioning system, his breathing slowed. He listened carefully. He had heard that sound before, not here, somewhere else. His mind searched through years of memories with remarkable precision. The sound belonged somewhere. Just not inside Grace Fellowship Church. He slowly turned toward his mother. Mom. This time his voice was firmer. Sound. Sarah leaned closer. What sound? The clicking. She listened. She heard only the pastor's voice and the soft rustle of turning pages. I don't hear anything. Noah swallowed. It's still there. Sarah's expression changed. She could see now that this wasn't ordinary nervousness. He wasn't overwhelmed by the crowd. He wasn't distracted. He was trying to tell her something. For the first time that morning, a small question formed in her own mind. What if Noah wasn't imagining this? What if he really had noticed something everyone else had missed before she could answer herself? The faint metallic click came a third time. This time, it was just a little louder. Sarah heard nothing. Yet something in Noah's face made her hesitate. She had seen that expression before. It wasn't fear, it was certainty. The same look he wore when he noticed the flowers beside the pulpit had been moved. The same look he wore when he quietly corrected the order of the hymn books without anyone asking. He wasn't guessing, he was observing. Pastor Michael closed his Bible. May the Lord bless the reading of his word. Amen. The congregation answered together. The choir director stepped forward. Homecoming Choir has prepared a special anthem this morning. Warm applause filled the sanctuary. As choir members stood, Sarah leaned closer to Noah. Show me. He looked surprised. You'll come? She nodded. If something doesn't seem right to you, I want to see it. A small wave of relief crossed Noah's face. He carefully stood. Sarah quietly rose beside him. The people seated around them assumed they were simply stepping out for a moment. No one paid much attention. Near the back of the sanctuary, Harold Whitmore noticed them leaving. He glanced toward an usher and whispered, "Would you check that everything's all right?" The usher smiled politely. "I'm sure they're fine." The choir began singing. Rich harmonies filled every corner of Grace Fellowship Church. Most eyes remained fixed on the platform. Almost no one noticed Sarah and Noah slipping into the side hallway. The moment they stepped out of the sanctuary, the music became softer. The hallway felt strangely still. Sunlight streamed through the narrow windows, casting long bands of light across the polished floor. Noah walked ahead with quiet purpose. He wasn't wandering. He knew exactly where he wanted to go. Sarah followed only a step behind. He stopped beside the hallway, where the fellowship hall connected to the sanctuary. Then he slowly pointed. There. Sarah looked. At first, she saw nothing unusual. The painted brick walls looked clean. The utility room door was closed. The air vent sat high above exactly where it always had. She almost told Noah everything looked normal. Then she noticed him staring lower. Not at the vent. Not at the door. At the floor. She followed his gaze. There, near the base of the wall, resting partly beneath a storage cabinet, was something so small she would have walked past it 100 times without seeing it. It didn't belong there. She frowned. What is that? Noah answered almost in a whisper. It wasn't here last Sunday. Sarah slowly stepped closer. She couldn't yet tell what she was looking at. But for the first time that morning, she stopped thinking Noah might be mistaken. And she began wondering whether he had just found the first clue that something inside Grace Fellowship Church was terribly wrong. Sarah slowly bent down. The object was tucked so close to the wall that it blended into the shadows beneath the storage cabinet. From where she stood, she couldn't make out exactly what it was. She reached out instinctively. Before her fingers touched it, Noah quietly spoke. Don't. She froze. His voice wasn't frightened, it was calm, certain. Sarah slowly withdrew her hand. Why? She whispered. Noah kept his eyes fixed on the object. I don't think it's supposed to move. A chill ran through Sarah. She looked again. He was right. Whatever lay beneath the cabinet didn't look like part of the building. She searched her memory. She had walked this hallway hundreds of times over the years. She had vacuumed it during church workdays, decorated it for Christmas, helped repaint it one summer. She had never seen that object before. The choir's voices drifted softly through the hallway as the special music continued inside the sanctuary. For everyone else, Homecoming Sunday was unfolding exactly as planned. Only Sarah and Noah knew something felt different. Sarah took a slow breath. "We need Pastor Michael." Noah nodded immediately. They hurried back toward the sanctuary. As they reached the rear entrance, an usher quietly stepped toward them. "Everything okay?" Sarah forced a polite smile. "I need to speak with Pastor Michael." Usher glanced toward the platform. "He's about to welcome the guest choir." "I know," Sarah replied gently, "but it's important." Concern in her voice caused the usher's expression to change. "Get him." Choir finished to warm applause. Pastor Michael stepped back toward the pulpit, smiling at the congregation. Before he could speak, the usher quietly approached and leaned close. "Pastor." The pastor listened. His smile faded ever so slightly. He looked toward the rear of the sanctuary where Sarah and Noah stood waiting. Excusing himself for just a moment, he stepped down from the platform. "Sarah," he said softly, "what's happened?" Sarah glanced at Noah. He noticed something in the hallway. Pastor Michael smiled kindly. "What did you find, Noah?" Noah looked directly into his eyes. "I don't know what it is." He paused. "But it wasn't there last Sunday." Pastor Michael's expression grew thoughtful. He had learned over the years that Noah almost never made observations without a reason. "Would you show me?" Noah nodded. Without another word, the three of them quietly left the sanctuary together. Behind them, the congregation assumed Pastor Michael had stepped out to handle a routine matter. No one noticed Harold Whitmore watching from his pew. His brow furrowed as he whispered to himself, "What could possibly be so urgent?" None of them knew. But within the next few minutes, the ordinary rhythm of Homecoming Sunday was about to be interrupted in a way no one could have imagined. The moment the sanctuary doors closed behind them, the choir's voices became distant. The hallway felt unusually quiet. Pastor Michael walked beside Noah without saying a word. He didn't want to interrupt the boys' thoughts. Sarah stayed close behind, her heart beating faster with every step. They reached the hallway where Noah had stopped earlier. He pointed toward the storage cabinet. "There." Pastor Michael looked where Noah was pointing. At first he saw only polished tile, painted brick, and the cabinet that had stood in the same place for years. Then he stepped closer. His expression changed. Resting near the base of the wall, partially hidden beneath the cabinet, was a small gray metal box with a thin black cable disappearing behind the trim. He frowned. "I don't remember seeing that." Sarah quietly replied, "Neither do I." The blinking green light flashed once again. Noah quietly watched it. "That's the sound," he whispered. "Clicking." The three adults looked at him. "Light clicks every time it blinks." The first time that morning, they heard it too, a faint click barely louder than a watch ticking, so quiet that it disappeared beneath the distant music still drifting from the sanctuary. Pastor Michael's face grew serious. He reached into his pocket, removed his phone, and looked at Frank. "I don't know what this is." He glanced toward the sanctuary where hundreds of people continued worshiping, completely unaware. "But until we do, we're treating it like it doesn't belong here." A heavy silence settled over the hallway for the first time that morning. Everyone standing there realized Noah hadn't been imagining anything. He had seen what every adult had walked past, and whatever it was, it had no business being inside Grace Fellowship Church. Pastor Michael stepped back. His eyes never left the small metal box beneath the cabinet. The choir was still singing inside the sanctuary. Warm applause echoed faintly through the walls. Only a few feet away, hundreds of people were celebrating Homecoming Sunday, completely unaware that four people now stood frozen in a quiet hallway. Frank swallowed hard. "Worked in this church for 18 years. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Know every light switch, every water valve, every fuse box, every storage room." He slowly shook his head. "Never seen that before." Pastor Michael looked at him. "Could it belong to the alarm system?" Frank answered immediately. "No, the alarm controls are in the office." What about the sound system? Frank shook his head again. No, sir. This isn't ours. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What do we do? Pastor Michael looked back toward the sanctuary. The guest choir had just finished their final note. The congregation erupted into applause. Children laughed somewhere in the fellowship hall. The building was more crowded than it had been in years. His mind raced. He couldn't create panic over something he didn't understand. But he also couldn't ignore what was sitting in front of him. Noah quietly spoke. It wasn't hidden before. Everyone turned toward him. What do you mean? Pastor Michael asked. Noah pointed toward the cabinet. Somebody moved it. Frank looked closely at the floor. Then he noticed something, tiny scrape marks, fresh ones. The cabinet had definitely been dragged, not weeks ago, recently, very recently. Frank slowly nodded. He's right. I waxed these floors Friday afternoon. He pointed to the faint marks. Those scratches weren't here. Silence filled the hallway. Pastor Michael felt a chill run through him. Someone had moved the cabinet after the floors had been polished. Someone had placed or uncovered the object afterward. He made a decision. Frank. Yes, Pastor. I want you to quietly lock every side entrance. No one comes in. No one goes out. Frank nodded without hesitation. Do it. Sarah, she looked up. Stay with Noah. I'm going to call 911. Sarah's eyes widened. You think it's that serious? Pastor Michael looked once more at the unfamiliar device. I don't know what it is. He paused. But I'd rather be embarrassed for overreacting than spend the rest of my life wishing I had acted sooner. He stepped several feet away before placing the call. His voice remained calm. This is Pastor Michael Carter from Grace Fellowship Church. My maintenance supervisor and I have found an unidentified electronic device inside our church. I'm not saying it's dangerous. It doesn't belong here. There was a brief pause as the dispatcher asked several questions. Then the dispatcher's tone changed. Pastor, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Not touch the object. Everyone away from that area. Begin moving people out of the building, calmly as possible. We're sending officers immediately. Pastor Michael slowly lowered the phone. Sarah searched his face. What did they say? He looked toward the sanctuary. The choir had just resumed singing. Hundreds of voices were praising God together. Many of them were elderly. Dozens were young children. Families filled every pew. He took a deep breath. Service has to stop. One brief moment he closed his eyes. Only minutes earlier he had prayed that Homecoming Sunday would glorify God. He never imagined it would require interrupting the biggest service of the year, or that the person God would use to protect his people would be the quiet 12-year-old boy almost everyone had overlooked. Pastor Michael turned toward Noah, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, he said softly. If you hadn't spoken up, he couldn't finish the sentence, because he suddenly realized something that made his heart sink. Noah hadn't found the device. He had noticed something was wrong before he ever saw it, and that realization frightened Pastor Michael more than anything else. Ladies and gentlemen, Pastor Michael said, his voice calm but urgent, I need everyone to leave the sanctuary immediately. Please remain calm and follow the ushers. Congregation looks confused. Harold looks shocked. People begin asking questions. The camera stays on Noah's face. Pastor Michael stared at the unfamiliar device beneath the cabinet. The blinking green light flashed once more. No one in that hallway spoke. No one moved. Only moments earlier, Homecoming Sunday had been filled with hymns, laughter, and celebration. Now, hundreds of lives depended on a decision made in just a few seconds. Within minutes, police officers, firefighters, and bomb technicians would surround Grace Fellowship Church. The congregation would discover that 12-year-old Noah Bennett hadn't imagined anything. He had noticed what every adult had missed, but the greatest shock was still waiting, because when investigators finally examined the mysterious device, they uncovered something no one standing in that church parking lot could have imagined. And one respected church leader would soon be forced to confront a painful truth that would change his heart forever. We'll uncover what happened next in Part 3.